January 1813, off the coast of North Carolina. A schooner named Patriot drifts into the fog, her sails torn, her deck deserted, and not a single sound left behind. The storm has passed, the sea is calm again, but Theodosia Burr, daughter of a former vice president of the United States, is nowhere to be found. Not a body, not a trace, only the faint echo of a ship's bell, swallowed by the wind. Welcome to a disappearance that has haunted the Atlantic for more than 200 years. A mystery that began with a woman's promise to return home and ended somewhere between sky and sea. They called it a singular occurrence, the vanishing of Theodosia Burr Alston, and even today historians, sailors, and ghost hunters still whisper her name across the Carolina coast. January 1813, Georgetown, South Carolina. Candlelight flickers through the window of a harbor house. A daughter embraces her father's letter, sealed unread, meant for a reunion that would never come. Outside, the Patriot waits, her flag snapping against the salt wind. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs, low and uncertain. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and the exact minute you're listening to this moment. Imagine the sea that night, the fog pressing against the hull, the creak of the ropes, the silence after the waves. Because what you're about to hear is not just the story of a woman lost to the ocean, it's the sound of a promise that never reached the shore. Now let's go back to that January night. The line appeared between ordinary columns, shipments, exports, the movement of goods, and then that one sentence. It was the kind of report that should have faded within a week, swallowed by the noise of other headlines. But this one lingered, because among the names lost aboard that schooner was Theodosia Burr Alston, daughter of Aaron Burr, once Vice President of the United States, and the woman who had written to him only days before, "I come to you, my beloved father. Expect me by sea." She never arrived. The Patriot left Georgetown just after dawn, light wind, fair weather. The harbor logs note her departure as routine. No mention of danger, no hint of a storm. Her crew 8 men, her passengers 2, her destination New York. By evening, the ship had vanished into the low Atlantic fog. By morning, the sea was empty. They said the ocean was strangely calm that week, no storm strong enough to claim a ship of her size. And yet no wreckage was ever found. No mast, no hull, no letters in bottles, no driftwood washing ashore. Just an absence so complete it felt deliberate, as though the sea had chosen silence over debris. Within months, rumors began to wash up like fragments of a shattered truth. In Charleston, a man swore he saw a light off Bald Head Island, a single lantern moving against the horizon long after the Patriot should have passed. In Norfolk, sailors told of a schooner adrift, sails torn, no voices on deck, its name erased from the stern. Along the Outer Banks, beachcombers found a woman's silk slipper soaked in brine, delicate embroidered, the sort a governor's wife might wear. Some said it was pirates. The Gulf Stream then was a corridor for privateers and smugglers. The Patriot had once served as a privateer herself, fast-armed, known for her stealth. They said the pirates took her cargo, her gold, her passengers, and left no one alive to tell the tale. Others whispered darker things, that the ship was cursed from the moment it left port, her captain haunted by debts, her voyage marked by omens. In one letter preserved in the Burr family papers, a cousin wrote, "I dreamt of her the night before, standing upon a deck of black water, her hand outstretched, yet no voice came." When word reached Aaron Burr in New York, witnesses say he read the first telegram in silence, folded it once, and said only, "She is dead. She perished by the sea." But later in private, he told a friend that he believed otherwise, that she was alive somewhere waiting to return. Over the years, accounts multiplied. A confession from a dying pirate in 1820 claiming he had taken part in a raid that captured a fine lady who refused to remove a locket bearing her father's portrait. A plantation ledger in Ocracoke Island noting a woman unknown, shipwrecked and delirious. A weathered portrait found decades later in an attic near Nag's Head, bearing a faint inscription, TBA 1812. And yet none of it held proof. Each record led to silence, each trace to uncertainty. Theodosia's name became a whisper among sailors, the Lady of the Shoals they called her. Fishermen along Cape Hatteras spoke of seeing a woman's figure standing upon the breakers at dusk, her dress heavy with water, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Children were told never to call her name aloud near the tide, that she walked the shore searching for a ship that would never come. 2 centuries later, historians still turn pages that end mid-sentence. The Patriot's logbook last entry dated January 2nd, nothing beyond. The weather records show no gale that night. The Coast Guard maps from the 19th century mark no wreck of her description. And yet the sea along that stretch remains treacherous, not for its storms, but for its stories. In the museum at Bald Head Island, there's a display case no larger than a bread box inside a strand of seaweed twisted around a fragment of silk ribbon. The tag reads, "Believed to belong to Theodosia Burr, Alston recovered, 1813. Whether true or not, visitors stare, as though something in that salt-stained thread still holds the echo of her name. They say that on certain nights when the mist rises low and the tide turns inward, you can hear a bell out at sea, faint, deliberate, like a ship calling through time. The old fisherman refused to answer. That's not for us, one said. That's for her." Theodosia Burr, educated in Europe, admired in salons, cherished by her father, bound for a simple journey home, vanished into an ocean that kept her secret. The newspapers called it a singular disappearance. History called it an unsolved mystery. But along the Carolina coast, they still call it a haunting. Because in the end, it wasn't just a ship that vanished, it was a daughter, a name and a line in history that dissolved into mist. And sometimes, when the fog thickens and the world falls quiet, it feels as though she's still out there standing at the rail of a ship that never reached the shore, watching, waiting, listening for a voice that never came. January 1813, the southern coast of America lies under a winter haze. Gray sky, heavy with salt and mist, stretching from Charleston to the barrier islands of North Carolina. The war with Britain still shadows the sea. The Atlantic is alive with tension. Privateers, smugglers, and ships flying false flags haunt the routes that once carried nothing more than cotton letters and dreams. It is in this uneasy silence that Theodosia Burr Alston steps aboard a vessel named Patriot. She is 30 years old, daughter of Aaron Burr, the man who once stood beside Jefferson as vice president and who 3 years earlier was tried for treason in one of the most scandalous cases of the young republic. Her name Theodosia had once meant grace and promise, but by 1813 it was a name whispered with unease in drawing rooms and harbor taverns alike. The daughter of a fallen statesman, a widow in spirit, though her husband still breathes, a woman defined by absence. Her child had died the year before, a young son only 10 years old. And in every surviving letter her words tremble between devotion and despair. "I come to you, my beloved father. Though the seas are uncertain, my heart will not wait." Theodosia boards the Patriot at Georgetown, South Carolina. The docks are quiet that morning, gulls circling wind moving through the masts. She wears black morning silk, her hands gloved, her face pale. Witnesses remember her calm, a stillness that unsettled even the crew. The captain, William Overstocks, had been hired for his discretion. The ship itself, sleek, narrow, once a privateer, now carries only a few barrels of rice, some personal trunks, and the weight of its passengers' secrets. Records show she was escorted to the wharf by her husband's aide and a servant. One of them later testified that she turned once before boarding, not toward them, but toward the horizon, as though searching for something unseen. At sea, the air would have smelled of resin and rope, of damp oak and tar. The sails creaked with the rhythm of a tired heartbeat. For most of that week, the Atlantic lay eerily still. No storms recorded, no squalls on the horizon. Yet ships along the same route reported a strange rolling fog, thick, metallic, and low to the water, the kind that muffled bells and erased distance. Within 48 hours of departure, all trace of Patriot vanishes. The Carolina coast in those years was a frontier of both commerce and superstition. The waters between Georgetown and Cape Hatteras were littered with wrecks, some real, some imagined. Locals spoke of lights moving over the dunes at night, of phantom ships that appeared before storms of women who waited on the beaches, calling out names the sea had already taken. To disappear there was not merely to die, it was to join the vocabulary of the coast. One contemporary journal, a sailor's log, found decades later, describes seeing a schooner without voice near Ocracoke Inlet around that same time. She bore no flag, made no signal, he wrote. But we saw a figure at the bow, a woman unmoving her dress, whipping in the wind. When we hailed her, she vanished into the fog. The log ends there. No coordinates, no date, just that image. In New York, Aaron Burr was living in quiet exile. His political career destroyed his reputation a shadow. Friends described him as a man composed of grief. When the letters stopped coming from his daughter, he is said to have walked to the harbor every evening waiting for a ship that never arrived. The press, cautious but curious, printed small notices. The Charleston Courier mentioned a schooner long overdue. The Evening Post published the now famous line, "No vessel was ever heard from, nor any passenger accounted for." Behind those words lay an entire nation's fascination with the unknown. For in a young America where reason and superstition still shared the same map, the disappearance of Theodosia Burr became more than news. It became a myth of loss, punishment, and the ocean's hunger. The geography of her final journey is deceptively small, barely 200 nautical miles of coast, but the places along that stretch hold their own ghosts. Bald Head Island with its dunes like bones beneath the sand. The Frying Pan Shoals where even experienced pilots feared the sudden drop of the tide. Nag's Head where legend says pirates once lured ships to destruction with lanterns hung from horses. Each place a name whispered in the same breath as hers. Weather records from the Charleston Observatory note an anomaly on January 3rd, a tremor upon the sea surface, not a storm, but a motion of the air that carried sound strangely far. Some historians later suggested this could explain the phantom bells sailors claimed to hear. Others dismiss it as folklore, yet the reports align too neatly to ignore. Then there is the geography of silence. Georgetown to the south where she departs, Nag's Head to the north where her legend begins. Between them 100 miles of shifting water and sand where compasses spin and wreckage drifts in circles. To the coastal families who lived by tides and omens, her story became a warning: don't trust a calm sea. As for the ship itself, Patriot was once a privateer under government commission during the War of 1812. Fast Narrow built for pursuit. When Burr's daughter boarded her, the vessel still carried scars from earlier battles, patched timber gun ports sealed with tar. Some swore that blood had once soaked her deck. Others said she was cursed, a ship of prey turned against its own. When asked about the voyage, an elderly dockhand later recalled her last sighting. The lady stood near the rail, he told a reporter in 1848. She looked toward the open water and smiled not in joy but in farewell. Theodosia Burr's journey began in grief. A mother bereft a daughter seeking her father. But in the archives it ends in blank space, a page turned to ship erased. What remains is atmosphere, the heavy air of the Carolinas, the creak of timber, the hush before fog rolls in. In that soundless expanse, the distance between fact and folklore blurs. The woman becomes the myth. The ocean becomes her archive. And as night falls again over the same coast 2 centuries later, locals still claim to see a single light move across the water. Sometimes it's a fishing boat, sometimes it isn't. Because here history does not vanish, it drifts. And somewhere between the fog and the tide, she still sails. In the brittle archives of early 19th century America, the disappearance of Theodosia Burr Alston sits like a faint watermark across the paper, visible only when the light hits just right. Every trace of her life in those first weeks of 1813 ends abruptly, and the records that remain feel less like evidence than echoes. The first report appears in the Charleston Courier, dated January 23, 1813. It notes simply, "The schooner Patriot Captain Overstocks bound for New York has not been heard from since leaving this port on the 2nd instant. The weather fair, her fate unknown." In those 3 words, her fate unknown, the disappearance begins its slow transformation into legend. By February, merchants along the coast were already speculating. The Savannah Republican wrote, "It is feared the Patriot has suffered capture by an English cruiser, or worse, fallen into the hands of privateers who infest these waters." The War of 1812 had made such losses common, but none carried a name so charged, so entangled in the country's young conscience. For this was no ordinary passenger. Theodosia Burr, the daughter of Aaron Burr, who had dueled and slain Alexander Hamilton less than a decade before, carried with her a lineage both political and cursed. In the letters found among Burr's papers in New York, one line repeats with unsettling calm, "She will arrive in due season." The handwriting fades, the tone hopeful, but history knows it was the last assurance he ever wrote. A surviving ship manifest from Georgetown lists only a handful of names: Captain William Overstocks, First Mate Enoch Cobb, crew of 6 surnames indecipherable in the clerk's spidery ink, passengers Mrs. Alston and servant colored female. Below a final annotation, cargo rice household effects papers. No mention of weapons, though naval records later confirm the Patriot once bore 6 carriage guns during her commission as a privateer. By 1813, those ports had been sealed, or so the record claims. In Washington's Naval Chronicle for March, an unsigned report appeared. The schooner Patriot, formerly the privateer, Vengeance is missing. Last seen off the Cape Fear Shoals. Singular disappearance. The phrasing "singular disappearance" would be repeated again and again, migrating through newspapers like a ghostly refrain. Singular as though it resisted reason, as though the Atlantic itself had performed a selective act of erasure. One letter preserved in the Library of Congress, dated April 3, 1813, carries the trembling handwriting of a man named Benjamin Crowninshield, then Secretary of the Navy. "We have sought all manner of intelligence respecting the schooner Patriot, once a public vessel, now private. No account of her crew or passengers has been rendered. It is believed she was lost upon the Frying Pan Shoals, though no wreck has been observed. This is a mysterious occurrence which may never be resolved." A mysterious occurrence. Even in official correspondence, the tone borders on superstition. The bureaucratic voice gives way to unease. Meanwhile, fragments surface elsewhere: a logbook from the brig Pilgrim records passing, floating spars charred, and a trunk of female apparel near Hatteras on January 5th. No positive identification. The objects vanished into rumor traded between sailors until the tale hardened into certainty they had seen her things. Yet when investigators later compared the report, the coordinates did not align. The current, it seemed, was carrying not debris, but stories. Aaron Burr's private notebook, discovered among his effects decades later, contains a passage written in pencil rather than ink. "I have lost her not to death, for the grave is merciful, and yields an end, but to the sea which confers none. The sea neither kills nor spares, it only withholds." He never published those words, but they capture the strange stillness that hangs over the case, an absence that feels active, as though the ocean itself were a participant. In 1819, the first confession appears. A dying sailor named Frank Burdett, held at Norfolk for piracy, tells a visiting chaplain that years earlier his crew boarded a schooner off Cape Hatteras. He describes a lady of high breeding who refused to give her name, clutched a miniature portrait of a man, and faced her captors with a composure that unstrung them. She was, he said, made to walk the plank when she would not yield her jewels. The chaplain's notes, published posthumously, identify her only as a Southern lady lost in 1813. Yet within months, pamphleteers in New York had already decided it was Theodosia. Historians remain divided. The confession was hearsay, no corroboration, no bodies, no ship's name. Still, the detail of the miniature matches, known descriptions of the locket. She wore a small ivory portrait of Aaron Burr encased in gold. The artifact itself has never been found. Another document, more sober but equally chilling, emerges from a customs ledger at Ocracoke Inlet, an entry from 1813 reading, "One female unknown, washed ashore, given Christian burial by locals. No description, no location, only those words." In later retellings, the unknown woman acquires features, garments, even words spoken before death, none of which appear in the ledger. The fact becomes folklore by the pressure of longing. For decades afterward, letters continued to circulate between scholars, widows, and curious travelers, each claiming to have encountered a relic of the Patriot, a fragment of timber carved with the letters P.T., a woman's ring, a scrap of black silk embroidered with a bee. None proven, each catalogued and lost again. The National Archives now lists 42 separate items once attributed to the Patriot or Mrs. Alston, not one verified. The language of officialdom gradually turned elegiac. An 1821 maritime report summarizes the case in 6 words: "Vessel and passengers not recovered." By 1830, the phrasing had softened further: "Believed lost." By 1840, it became "fate unknown." The bureaucracy had absorbed the mystery into routine. Yet even in its bureaucratic quiet, the story refused extinction. Visitors to the Carolina coast recorded strange local habits: fishermen touching their hats when fog rolled in, women laying ribbons upon driftwood as offerings. They said it was for the lost lady. An 1850 travel diary by Lydia Maria Child notes, "They speak her name as if she might still return with the tide." The official record closes where legend begins. The last factual entry concerning Patriot appears in Lloyd's List of American Vessels Lost at Sea, 1813. Schooner Patriot, late privateer. Overstock's master sailed Georgetown for New York January 2nd. Not since heard of. Supposed foundered off Cape Hatteras. All souls aboard perished. Cause uncertain. A century later, maritime historians still circle those same phrases: supposed, uncertain, unheard of, the vocabulary of absence. In the measured language of record keepers, the mystery endures precisely because it was never conclusively disproved. Theodosia Burr did not die. She ceased to appear. And so, among the ledgers and microfilm pages, one can trace the gradual haunting of history by its own precision. The further the investigators reached into fact, the more the facts dissolved. What began as a ship's log became a litany of vanishing ink, a chorus of clerks, sailors, and widows writing into the same silence. A singular disappearance, the reports still whisper, her fate unknown. And between those two phrases lies the unbroken horizon of 1813, the gray sea, the drifting fog, and a name the ocean has never returned. Along the coast of North Carolina, the sea is not merely water. It is memory breathing, restless, and alive. Fishermen call it the keeper of voices. And in the years after 1813, when the schooner Patriot and her passengers were declared lost, the water began to speak in its own way. The first whispers came from Bald Head Island. A ferryman named Enoch Price told anyone who would listen that on calm nights he could see a schooner glide across the horizon. No lanterns, no sound of oars, only a white shape moving through mist. He said it always appeared when the tide turned inward and always vanished before the moon rose. Locals named it the Lady's Ship. By 1820, travelers recorded hearing the same story in different towns, New Bern, Beaufort, even as far as Norfolk. Each version added a detail: the ship moved against the wind. A woman stood at its bow. The sea around her was calm, even when storms raged elsewhere. Theodosia's name was not always spoken. Sometimes she was only the governor's daughter, sometimes the woman of the tide. But every retelling bore the same signature: she belonged to the sea now, and the sea would not release her. Children were told to keep silent near the dunes at night, lest the lady mistake their laughter for her child's voice and follow it inland. Women walking the beaches claimed to find footprints that stopped halfway down the sand where the tide had not yet reached. Old men swore that a bell would ring at dawn on certain anniversaries, faint, distant, a ship's bell with no ship to answer. The clergy condemned such talk as blasphemy, yet even ministers admitted strange happenings. In the diary of Reverend Samuel McNair, 1823, one entry reads, "The people speak of a figure seen upon the shore, clothed in mourning, her countenance pale. I have myself heard the bell, though there was no vessel in sight." The Reverend never preached against the tale again. Some said the haunting was penance, the restless soul of Aaron Burr's daughter searching for forgiveness her father could never grant. Others said it was retribution, the ocean taking payment for sins of power, ambition, and pride. Still others believed the sea had claimed her not in malice, but in mercy, a mother reclaiming her child. In Ocracoke, they tell of an innkeeper who found a woman's portrait washed ashore after a gale. The frame was cracked, the glass salted white, yet the face within was strangely untouched. He kept it above his hearth until one evening during a thunderstorm, the portrait fell without wind or movement. When he lifted it, the woman's eyes seemed changed, no longer gazing outward, but down as if at the water below. He returned it to the beach the next morning. The waves took it back. In some versions, she returns not as a spirit, but as an omen. A captain leaving Wilmington in 1838 wrote in his log, "Met with heavy fog, saw female form upon water. Crew unnerved, turned back to port." The entry ends without conclusion. He drowned 3 months later off Cape Fear. Stories multiplied because the land itself seemed to invite them. The shoals near Hatteras glimmer at dusk, sand shifting under the current until it appears as if something moves beneath. The fog rises in walls so dense that sound bends. Voices carry from miles away. To those who live there, these are not illusions. They are hauntings of geography. Even the enslaved people working along the coast folded her tale into their own folklore. WPA oral accounts collected a century later record an elder named Charity Gray saying they called her Miss Theo, said she walked the water with her lantern looking for her baby. When she come, the tide rise too high. You best close your door and don't look out. To them, she was no ghost of privilege. She was a warning, a spirit of the deep that blurred the line between grief and wrath. In Georgetown, where her journey began, an old house still stands by the wharf. Locals call it the waiting room. They say a candle burns there without flame, a light that glows only when the air smells of salt. Visitors swear they have seen a woman's reflection in the glass, though the window faces only darkness. Meanwhile, inland in New York, Aaron Burr lived on as if tethered to that same apparition. Neighbors wrote of hearing him speak softly into an empty room. "She is here," he once told a friend, "but not as you would see her." The line between father and phantom blurred until both were half ghosts. Scholars who visit the region today still hear the stories from fishermen and guides. They recount the sound of a woman's laughter on nights when the fog creeps close to the dunes. One coastal ranger swore that in 1979 he saw a shape in the surf, a figure rising from the water, walking toward the land, then vanishing without a footprint. The old men told him afterward, "She doesn't like to be seen." Superstition wrapped itself around the case like seaweed around a mast. The wreckers, those who salvaged debris from the coast, refused to keep anything bearing the letters P or T. They believed it cursed their hands. Sailors avoided painting women on their figureheads, fearing to summon the Lady of the Shoals. And every year on the 2nd of January, the bells of small seaside chapels rang once, though no service was held. No one claimed to pull the rope. By the time the 20th century arrived, the rational world had long absorbed the loss as mere maritime tragedy. But in the barrier islands they kept a different calendar, one marked by storms, tides, and the return of strange lights over the water. To them, history had only documented what the ocean had chosen to conceal. Folklorists visiting the region in the 1930s noted the persistence of her story in African-American spirituals and gullah chants. One fragment recorded on Sapelo Island sings, "She gone down the salt road, child. Don't you call her name? She gone with the morning tide. But the sea remember all the same." It is haunting because it carries both mourning and reverence. The ghost of Theodosia Burr no longer belonged to politics or pedigree. She had been reborn in myth, an embodiment of longing itself. On quiet nights when the moon cuts the water into ribbons of silver, the fishermen of the Carolinas still pause before casting their nets. Some make the sign of the cross. Others whisper, "Sail, safe lady." It is not fear that moves them. It is respect, the recognition that the sea holds its own archives written not in ink, but in silence. And if you walk that shoreline long enough past the ruined piers and the whispering reeds, you might see it too. A faint light far out on the water, steady, unwavering, moving where no vessel sails. Some say it's only the reflection of stars, but the old ones will tell you that's her lantern. The Lady of the Shoals still sails. Her fate remains unknown, her story unfinished. And somewhere between tide and time, the daughter of Aaron Burr still waits not for rescue but for remembrance. Time does not erase disappearances, it only buries them under new ones. A century after Theodosia Burr Alston vanished into the fog, another ship would disappear in nearly the same waters the Carroll A. Deering 1921 found beached and empty on the North Carolina coast. Her crew gone, her logbook missing, her galley table set for a meal that was never eaten. Locals called her the ghost ship of the Outer Banks, and when they spoke of her, they did not separate her from the older story they said the lady had taken another. It is this pattern, this repetition of absence, that turns a single event into a legend. The sea keeps rewriting the same sentence, only changing the names. Each century offers its own version of the Patriot, a vessel swallowed by silence, a human presence erased mid-breath. In 1813, the language was singular disappearance. In 1921, it was unaccountable derelict. Today, the Coast Guard reports use colder words, cause undetermined. But the rhythm is the same. The record begins in certainty and ends in ellipsis. Scholars at the University of North Carolina once laid these cases side by side, Theodosia's Patriot, the Carroll A. Deering, the missing lightship, Diamond Shoals, the wartime freighter. Cyclops, 4 ships, 4 eras, the same stretch of water. Each vanishes between coordinates where the currents cross like braided threads. Mariners call it the graveyard of the Atlantic. Locals call it something older, the mouth of God. The similarities are too elegant to ignore. The weather calm before disappearance. The lack of debris, the absence of distress signals, the presence reported again and again of lights that move against the wind. The Coast Survey calls them phosphorescent vapor. Fishermen call them souls adrift. When the Deering ran aground, rescuers boarded her at dawn. They found the wheel lashed, the sails tattered but uncut, and a single chair overturned in the captain's cabin. In the drawer lay a small locket, tarnished, salt-worn, bearing the faint image of a woman in early 19th century dress. It was dismissed as coincidence. But to those who remembered the old story, the link was clear. The ocean, they said, had returned what it borrowed. There are records that never reached print, government memoranda, internal investigations. One Navy report from 1922 notes in cautious language, regional magnetism anomalies persist near Cape Hatteras. Navigators describe compasses wandering. The same phenomenon was reported by British sailors a century earlier in 1812, before Theodosia's voyage, a distortion that pulled needles toward the shoals. Perhaps it was mineral. Perhaps, as one anonymous correspondent suggested, the pulse of something beneath. In 1865, during the Civil War, a Union gunboat named Chicopee anchored near Bald Head to repair her engine. At midnight, the lookout claimed to see a woman in black standing upon the sand. The captain ordered search parties ashore, but they found only footprints leading to the tide prints that ended mid-step. The logbook entry remains preserved in the National Archives, apparition female unaccounted for. another singular occurrence written in the same tone that once described Theodosia's fate. The motif deepens a geography of vanishings stitched by the same tide. Sailors pass these stories down not as superstition, but as navigation. They say if you hear a woman's voice across the water, do not answer. The wind carries echoes from other centuries. The barrier islands act as a kind of living archive. Every lost soul leaves its residue. In this way, Theodosia becomes less a ghost than a constant the face history gives to the concept of erasure without end. Even the language of the files mimics her disappearance. Pages half-written, sentences that trail into silence. The investigator's handwriting that fades as if the ink itself obeyed the tide. A Bureau of Marine Investigation folder from 1922 contains a typed note unsigned. We are charting the same blank space again. Maritime historians began to speak of the recurrence principle that certain coordinates act as thresholds where record and myth intertwine. Cape Fear, Frying Pan Shoals, Ocracoke Inlet. They are not merely places on a map. They are phrases in an unfinished sentence stretching from 1813 to now. In the late 19th century, ghost stories grew around other disappearances too. The Mary Celeste found adrift in the Atlantic with her cargo intact, her crew vanished. Newspapers called her Theodosia's sister ship. The implication was not literal but symbolic, another repetition of the same absence. Each generation inherits the last one's mystery like a hand-me-down relic, slightly altered, slightly frayed. In the 1940s, during wartime research into sonar mapping, naval technicians scanning the Carolina coast reported hearing faint, rhythmic pulses beneath the waves. When amplified, the pattern resembled absurdly the cadence of a ship's bell. The data were filed away as mechanical interference. Yet one technician interviewed years later admitted that he felt as if something old was answering. Patterns, repetition, and return. This is how folklore becomes indistinguishable from fact. Every record of Theodosia's Patriot fits neatly beside the later mysteries. Each has a missing vessel, a vanished crew, a calm sea, and a story that refuses closure. Each breeds its own legend of spectral ships, phantom lights, and half-seen figures at the bow. Together they form a single narrative, the Atlantic as an engine of forgetting. Writers and poets have long been drawn to that motif, the sea as both tomb and archive. Walt Whitman called it the gray, mother swallowing her children and singing their names. Herman Melville, who sailed the same waters, wrote, "Some secrets sleep in the deep and wake only to mirror the moon." When later generations read of Theodosia Burr, they hear the same undertone that death may be finite but disappearance is eternal. In Georgetown, where her voyage began, residents once claimed that every new shipwreck brought a visitation, a woman's shadow gliding past windows near the wharf. After the wreck of the Deering, those sightings multiplied. A century divided them, but the outline was identical, a figure in black eyes fixed on the horizon, the past replaying itself in ghostly rhythm. Even modern researchers, armed with sonar and simulation, admit a lingering unease. When asked why so many ships vanish along that coast, one oceanographer replied, "It's not the sea that confuses us, it's the repetition. We keep finding the same void." The bridge between Theodosia's time and ours is not built of facts, it is built of patterns. Each disappearance feels less like an isolated tragedy and more like a recurring memory. The Atlantic cannot stop dreaming. In that sense, her story becomes the first chapter in an unending record, a prologue to every unexplained loss that followed. And so the motif endures. A ship leaves harbor in clear weather. A storm forms where none was predicted. Light flickers on the water. The vessel fades into fog. The papers print a brief notice. The phrase "fate unknown" closes the file. Then somewhere along the coast a bell rings where no ship sails. 2 centuries apart, the pattern has not changed. Theodosia Burr Alston's name has become shorthand among historians for what the ocean keeps the unreturnable. Her disappearance, once singular, now belongs to a lineage of vanishings that trace a single invisible current through time. Perhaps this is why her story refuses to rest, because it was never only hers. It was the first verse of a longer elegy still being written by the sea itself. And if you listen closely to that coast, the one that swallows names and returns only legends, you might hear the refrain beneath the waves. One ship gone, another follows. The horizon repeats. The record erases itself again. The pattern holds. The sea remembers. And the lady still sails. They say every mystery leaves behind one fragment too heavy for the ocean to keep. And for Theodosia Burr Alston, that fragment came ashore 80 years too late in a box beneath a bed in a dying woman's house. It was 1894. A physician named Dr. Joseph Hanahan was called to the bedside of an elderly woman on the Outer Banks, frail, fevered, and muttering about the lady from the sea. She asked that no priest be summoned, no prayers recited, only that a wooden chest under her bed be opened after she passed. The doctor, curious and cautious, obeyed. Inside lay a portrait, an oil miniature, its colors dulled by salt and age. The woman's face was unmistakable, dark eyes, auburn hair, a small curl at the temple. On the back, faintly scratched into the ivory TBA 1812. The doctor carried the portrait to a Charleston antiquarian who compared it to surviving likenesses of Theodosia Burr. The resemblance, he said, was of a nature that cannot be chance. But when the house was searched again the following day, the box was gone, and so was the old woman's body removed by distant relatives before dawn. The portrait has never been found since. That would be eerie enough if not for the letters that followed. Over the next decade, at least 4 separate collectors claimed to have seen the Burr miniature in private hands, once in Savannah, once in Norfolk, and once astonishingly at an estate sale in Baltimore. Each time it vanished before documentation could be made. One buyer, writing anonymously in 1902, said he sold it because the eyes would not stay still. Whether he meant the paint, the light, or something else, no one could tell. Then there were the journals. In 1928, archivists sorting through the Burr family papers at Princeton found a packet marked in Aaron Burr's handwriting, "Private correspondence to be destroyed." But one letter had been missed. It was dated February 1813, weeks after Theodosia's disappearance, and addressed to a man named Samuel Swartwout, a longtime associate. The ink was faint, the hand unsteady. "The thing which I feared has taken place. Yet I am told a light was seen off Ocracoke, and that a woman was brought ashore who spoke my name. I cannot believe yet. I cannot dismiss it." Below that, a postscript in smaller script, "Say nothing of the locket." The reference puzzled historians. No locket appears in any surviving inventory. But oral tradition along the Carolina coast keeps repeating it, that when the Patriot went down, a single gold locket was recovered by wreckers and passed from hand to hand, never leaving the region. One fisherman told an interviewer in the 1930s that his grandfather carried such a piece and that it burned cold in the hand. Worse were the contradictions in testimony. In 1840, a man named Charles McKeever, claiming to be the son of a Patriot crewman, gave a statement to a New Orleans journalist. He said his father confessed before death that the ship did not sink, it was captured, taken by pirates from Lafitte's network, stripped of cargo, passengers murdered. Theodosia, according to that tale, was spared for a while. McKeever's words were printed in serialized form, but before the final installment appeared, the newspaper's offices burned in a mysterious fire. The original manuscript perished. The author never rewrote it. Another confession emerged from a place even stranger, a Union prison record dated 1863 discovered in the National Archives. It contains the interrogation notes of a Confederate smuggler named Alonzo Frost, arrested for blockade running. When asked about his coastal routes, Frost digressed into what the officer called irrelevant superstition. The transcript reads, "We steer clear of the shoals because she guards them. The lady from the old war, not this one. She takes men who lie about what they've done. I've seen her twice." The officer dismissed him as delirious, but Frost's navigation chart, preserved beside the file, has a circle drawn around the same coordinates where the Patriot was last reported. Next to it, a single word in pencil, "Ode." Even more chilling are the absences in the archives themselves. The Naval Chronicles bound volume for 1813, held at the Library of Congress, contains a gap, pages 223 to 230, torn clean. The index references an article titled, "Loss of the Schooner Patriot." Those pages have never surfaced. Archivists who compared microfilm copies found the same void. One theory suggests deliberate removal, another misbinding. But among the staff, a quieter explanation circulates: the file erased itself. As if to mock the gap, new evidence kept surfacing where it shouldn't. In 1969, during renovation of an old customs house in Wilmington, workers found a glass bottle sealed with pitch behind a brick wall. Inside, a fragment of parchment with writing barely legible under mold. The words that could be read were few: "The ship taken. Forgive me. The lady brave." The bottle cracked during transport. The fragment disintegrated before chemical preservation could begin. Only a photograph remains blurred and partial, as though time itself resisted clarity. Modern oceanographers have since attempted to locate Patriot's wreck using sonar and magnetometer scans. None found trace of a vessel matching her build. Yet in 1996, one team reported a shadow off Cape Lookout dimensions consistent with a small schooner buried under 70 feet of silt. When divers descended, the equipment malfunctioned. Cameras refused to record. The dive log ends mid-sentence, visibility poor but something. The next line is smudged by water. Every generation uncovers its own almost clue, and every clue dissolves. The portrait, the locket, the torn pages, the bottle, the photograph. Each appears long enough to reignite belief, then slips back into myth. It is as though the evidence obeys the same rhythm as the sea surfacing, receding, never still. Some researchers now argue that the absence itself is the point, that Theodosia's case represents the earliest American instance of what they call the self-erasing narrative, an event documented so often from so many angles that its contradictions cancel one another. The story devours its own proof. One archivist put it simply, "Every time we look for her, something disappears." And perhaps that is the most haunting detail of all, that the archives mimic the ocean. Pages go missing, ink fades, evidence corrodes, names vanish. The same process that claimed her continues to claim the record of her. A disappearance that repeats itself in paper and salt. In 2007, a private collector in Beaufort anonymously donated a sealed envelope to a maritime museum. Inside was a photograph of a painting the same face as the lost miniature, but reinterpreted in oil. On the back, in spidery script, "She waits." No provenance, no name. Experts found that the pigment used, lead white and Prussian blue, dated to the 1810s. The painting itself has never been recovered. The photograph is all that remains. When asked why such fragments keep returning, one historian said, "Because she was never meant to rest. The sea made her its witness." And if the legend is to be believed, the sea still keeps her. Fishermen tell of seeing a figure on foggy nights standing upon a deck of no known vessel, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. When they approach, the light vanishes and the air turns colder, the water suddenly calm, as if holding its breath. Some say it's reflection, others atmospheric trick. But those who've seen it swear that just before the vision fades, they hear a woman's voice, soft and clear. Not yet. Not yet. 2 centuries of searching, and still the record will not close. The portrait reappears. The evidence contradicts. The sea refuses silence. The case remains open, a heartbeat underwater, a story suspended between fact and apparition. Perhaps that is what truly terrifies us, not that she died, but that the disappearance continues. That each new discovery becomes another, vanishing, another echo swallowed by the Atlantic's breath. That somewhere beneath those waves lies the archive of every unanswered question, and Theodosia Burr's voice calling from within it. Remember me, but do not find me. Because to find her would end the story, and this story, like the tide, was never meant to end. 2 centuries have passed since the Patriot slipped into the fog and was never seen again. The ocean that took her still murmurs against the Carolina coast, patient, deliberate, unchanged. Time has softened the details, but not the silence. Theodosia Burr Alston remains suspended, not alive, not dead, simply unresolved. In museums, her story hides behind glass. A small plaque in Charleston, half forgotten, reads, "Theodosia Burr Alston, daughter of Aaron Burr, lost at sea, January 1813. No dates of birth or death, only that phrase, lost at sea." The words seem insufficient for the gravity of what was lost: a woman, a lineage, a nation's uneasy conscience. Yet perhaps that brevity is fitting, because nothing about her story ends, it only drifts. The coastlines she knew have changed, plantations reclaimed by marsh towns swallowed by storms, but the people who live there still speak her name. Fishermen in Beaufort refused to sail on January 2nd. The old houses in Georgetown, where her footsteps once echoed across pine floors, keep a strange custom: a candle left burning in a window all night for a traveler who never arrives. In local folklore, the Lady of the Shoals no longer appears as a ghost meant to frighten. She has become a symbol, a figure of warning, of devotion, of unending search. Parents tell their children that she guards the coast, guiding lost boats back toward light. Others say she lures them deeper, jealous of their passage. Which is true depends on who you ask or how long you've listened to the sea. When researchers today trace the record, they find not answers but layers, each new document, another tide washing over the last. The letters blur, the ink dissolves, the handwriting thins to near transparency. Archivists handling her surviving correspondence report the same odd sensation: static on the fingertips, a faint smell of salt. One curator described it as the feeling of pages that remember the weather. There are still people searching: amateur historians, divers, descendants of sailors. Some seek closure, Others seek the thrill of the unknown. Expeditions have scoured the frying pan shoals with drones and sonar arrays, mapping the seabed where the Patriot might rest. They find anomalies, faint outlines in the sand that vanish upon approach, sonar reflections that move as though alive. Each time the data flickers, cuts out, and resumes elsewhere. The ocean does not like to be measured. But perhaps the true wreck is not beneath the waves. It lies in the archives, in the paper scars of history. The missing pages of the Naval Chronicle. The torn letter bearing the words, "Say nothing of the locket." The photograph of a portrait whose original has never been recovered. The story is scattered like driftwood fragments that will never reassemble, yet somehow form a shape the human mind cannot stop tracing. If you look closely, you can see the pattern repeating every few decades, a new disappearance, a new retelling. The language shifts, the format changes, but the tone is the same. In every generation, someone goes missing between the known and the unrecorded. And always the coast is there, a boundary between certainty and myth, between the world of the living and the archive of the dead. Sometimes late at night, archivists working alone report hearing faint sounds through their headphones, static like distant surf or the toll of a bell far away. They laugh it off, of course, but still they turn the volume down. There's something about that sound, as if someone somewhere were still calling to be found. Even now, the story refuses final punctuation. Theodosia's disappearance belongs equally to history and to haunting. Scholars debate, skeptics dismiss, believers wait. The ocean does neither. It simply breathes in, out, wave by wave, preserving what language cannot. And so the motif returns. The same words that open the file close it once more. No vessel was ever heard from, nor any passenger accounted for, after the schooner Patriot sailed from Georgetown, January 1813. That sentence remains the last official line. But behind it, another begins unwritten, whispered by wind and tide. Because the absence of evidence is not silence, it is continuation. Each retelling keeps her afloat. Each echo gives her shape again. If you stand tonight on the dunes at Bald Head Island, you might see it, a thin ribbon of light far out at sea. It drifts slowly, steady against the current. No modern ship sails that close to the shoals. Some say it's a trawler, others a mirage. But if you wait, the light will blink once, twice, and vanish. Then you'll understand why the locals lower their voices afterward. They say she's still there, keeping her promise to return. Maybe she does not want to be found. Maybe the ocean needs one story that will never close to remind us that not everything is meant to surface. Maybe disappearance itself is a form of survival, a way to live forever in speculation, untouched by certainty. And so we end where she began, with a calm sea, a daughter's letter, and the faint tolling of a bell that no one else can hear. Theodosia Burr Alston, the woman who sailed into history and became its silence, her fate unknown, her story unfinished, her name still carried by the tide. Do you hear it? That low hum beneath the surf, steady, distant, as if the sea were whispering something back. Maybe it's only the wind. Or maybe just beyond the horizon, a ship still sails in endless circles, her sails torn, her decks empty, her lantern burning through eternity. And if that's true, if she's still out there, then perhaps every wave that touches the shore is her hand against the glass, reminding us that some stories do not end, they echo. You've just heard a record from a history that never closed. Follow, listen, and remember, so the next voice the tide carries might not be lost.